Berchtesgaden and its surroundings are renowned for their spectacular scenery. Rarely can one encounter so much beauty concentrated in one area. The 2,714-meter-high Watzmann Mountain is its most distinctive landmark. This mountain is surrounded by a world-famous countryside at the northeastern edge of the German Alps. The picturesque Königssee lies between the Watzmann and the Hagengebirge, almost resembling a Norwegian ford. A boat trip across Lake Königssee, mainly located within the national park, is a highlight of the region. Having the majestic 2,000-meter-high Watzmann East Wall as a background made St. Bartholomew a famous motive for photographers and artists the world over. In 1134, monks founded the St. Bartholomew Church, which is renowned for its dome-shaped roof. The world-famous Ramsal Church, with the Reich in the background, has been an inspiration for many artists and photographers from around the world. Endless numbers of tourists appreciate the spectacular views from the Berchtesgaden Alps, which can be easily explored on foot, by bus, or by cable car. Hikers can reach high altitudes thanks to the well-kept network of trails. The Obersalzberg in 1936. The Obersalzberg became increasingly important as the second seat of government for Hitler since he seized power. Hitler's country residence, the Berghof, was renovated and extended on numerous occasions. Many of Hitler's inner cabinet also moved to the Obersalzberg, while Minister Albert Speer, Josef Goebbels, and Hermann Göring were there only part-time. Martin Bormann had a house very close to his Führer Hitler and spent most of his time there. When Hitler was on the Obersalzberg, Martin Bormann was always close by, ready to carry out Hitler's request as quickly as possible. Martin Bormann was the man responsible for the major transformation in the area, which was previously a high-altitude recuperation resort. He transfigured the whole area into a private and secure zone. Bormann's former adjutant, Fritz Darges, recollects.
War ein extrem ehrgeiziger Mann, der es ja in der Parteikarriere bis letzten Endes zum Stellvertreter oder Sekretär des Führers brachte und bis zum Stabsleiter bei Hess. Das war ja eine extrem hohe Position. Die hat er aufgrund seiner Tüchtigkeit und seines Ehrgeizes. Aber er ließ auch Leute übers Messer springen.
The former caretaker of Hitler's Berghof, Herbert Göring, who can be seen on the right beside Hitler in this picture, recalls how Bormann realized Hitler's ideas promptly.
Hitler dürfte nur irgendeine Idee äußern oder einen Gedanken, sofort hat er die verstrickt. Siehe Kehlsteinhaus, siehe Gutshof, siehe die Gewächshäuser. Der Kehlstein ist so ein vorgeschobener Berg, springt doch vor, nicht wahr? Hat Hitler mal gesagt, wäre doch wunderbar ein Aussichtspunkt, eine Sitzgelegenheit mit einem Aussichtspunkt zu errichten. Eine wunderbare Aussicht. Und das war schon wieder der Anstoß für Bormann für den Bau des Teehauses, nicht wahr? Durch diese Gedankengänge von Hitler.
November 1936, a meeting was requested on the Obersalzberg by Martin Bormann with Dr. Fritz Todt, who was General Inspector for German road infrastructures. Todt, who can be seen on the right, was the most highly respected road planner of his time and was therefore considered the most competent man for the Project Kehlstein. At first, Bormann had only planned a walking trail on the northern side of the Kehlstein, but then developed it into a road accessible to vehicles. On the 12th of April 1937, Bormann visited the construction site and expressed his wishes to build a road up to the south face of the mountain which could provide superior views of the surrounding countryside. The surveyors from the Polensky and Zollner firms set out the next day to examine the rugged south face of the Kehlstein mountain to find the most suitable route. During a following visit to the construction area, Bormann suggested that the road should be extended to just below the summit. The idea to build a house on the summit in the rock face was born. As the road plans extended to just below the summit, Bormann decided at the end of April 1937 to build another tea house, which would be larger and much more impressive than the existing tea house, which was located just below Hitler's Berghof near the Gutshof. In the meanwhile, Bormann considered the Eagle's Nest to be the ideal 50th birthday present for Hitler from the Nazi Party. Gretel and Willy Mittelstrasser were the caretakers at Hitler's Berghof, and recollect how Bormann decided to present the Führer with the Eagle's Nest as a 50th birthday present.
Genau wie in Kehlstein, da wollte ein Chef überraschen, okay, dass also der Bormann hat die gesamte Sache, die Bausache am Obersalzberg unter sich gehabt. Und durch den Kehlsteinbau, da wollte er ihn überraschen zu seinem 50. Geburtstag. Und das ist ihm praktisch auch gelungen. Ne?
Aber er war nicht oft oben.
Nein, wenn er oft oben war, aber war er 10-mal oben.
Er hat
aber öfter nicht.
Die Höhendinge nicht so vertragen. Also die
er hat bloß seine 1000 Meter praktisch Berghof
war er grün, die Höhe.
In the meanwhile, Bormann commissioned plans for the Kehlsteinhaus to be drafted by Professor of Architecture Roadway, who can be seen on the left hand in this picture. He had only 4 weeks to draft the plans. Bormann was immediately impressed by the architect's plans. This draft illustrates the house face covered with granite blocks, which fits into the surrounding scenery. The road building plans had to be considerably changed to accommodate the construction of a house on the 1,834-meter-high Kehlstein Ridge. The course of the road was finalized during a subsequent visit to the building site on July 12, 1937 by Bormann, Dr. Todt, Professor Fick, and diplom engineer Hans Halpner from the State Planning Office, who can be seen in the center of the photo. They also agreed to build a tunnel leading to a lift which would ascend into the interior of the house. Work was in full swing in the meanwhile. The transportation track from Schwarzkell was to accommodate the transit of the building materials for the planned work on the south face of the Kehlstein. At the same time, the Polensky and Zollner companies began construction of the Kehlstein Road. Foot porters had one of the most important jobs at the beginning of the Kehlstein project. About 50 men would have to hand carry the materials up along rough footpaths. They erected simple bases at different key points. These workers were mainly young men whose firms gave them the chance to volunteer for this prestige project. On October 2, 1937, only 4 months later, construction for a cable car began, which made transportation to the building materials for the upper construction sites a lot easier. In the meantime, a second transportation path had been built on the north side of the Kehlstein, known as the Dawsonwinkel Road. At about the same time, worker accommodation barracks were delivered from a company in Munich. At that time, the Obersalzberg road was still unpaved, which often led to problems for the heavy trucks. Nor was it unusual for the local farmers to come and help out when problems occurred. Manual labor was necessary to transport materials at the upper stages again. Up to 1,300 workers lived at the main camp, Ligaret. In addition to the administration office, there was a canteen and a theater. A further camp on the south side of the Kehlstein, known as Terzangel, was located above Ligaret. It was here that Polensky and Zollner installed their own offices and sleeping accommodations. The final barracks for the workers were transported on the incomplete Dawsonwinkel Road on the north face of the Kehlstein for the Kehlstein camp. The workers responsible for the tunnel construction were mainly from the Hochtief Company and resided at the present-day bus parking lot just below the Kehlsteinhaus from December 1937 on. Camp Kehlstein could accommodate up to 800 laborers. The Polensky and Zollner companies erected a barn for the machinery in the Schwarzkell Valley. In addition to a powerful generator, there was also a water pump and a large compressor, which supplied the south-face construction sites with pressurized air. Water had to conquer an altitude difference of approximately 1,200 meters. In order to achieve this, 3 pump stations were established on various levels. The barn at Schwarzkell and the Ligaret camp is recognizable in the upper part of this photo. We can see the air and water pipes in the foreground. Fences were erected to protect the air and water pipes from stone avalanches. On many occasions, large boulders rolled down and destroyed the pipelines, which considerably delayed construction. The middle and upper level of the Kehlstein Road construction began in the summer of 1937, following the completion of transportation tracks. When the trucks couldn't travel any further, extensive narrow-gauge railroad tracks were laid to remove all the loose rocks and boulders. The muddy paths posed enormous risks for the workers. Explosives were used to shape the road along the rock face, and the resulting boulders were manually reduced to gravel to some extent. Dr. Todt considered it essential that the road should blend in well with its surroundings, and therefore used the material remaining from the explosives to build walls along the road and form a base for the road foundation. Tunnel construction proved more difficult than initially thought. It was discovered after the first explosions that they were not dealing with solid rock, but a mass of rocks with numerous air pockets. It was necessary to use concrete to fill the hollows in order to form a solid body of rock so that a preliminary tunnel could be formed. tunnel was cleared, a natural stone wall was used to line it, giving it a vaulted depression. Sheets of corrugated iron were laid behind the stone lining to protect the tunnel from dampness. A preliminary tunnel for the underground elevator was driven in September of 1937. The Reich company was subcontracted by Polensky and Solner for this job. Just 2 weeks later, the tunnel was already 100 meters deep, and the cavity for the elevator was broken through from the summit ridge. The walls of the tunnel were lined with Kehlstein marble, which was taken from a quarry just above Berchtesgaden. A stone mason had built a huge swastika into the marble at the end of the 124-meter-long tunnel. But, following a request from Hitler, a bronze door was later used to cover this massive swastika. There was a waiting room for the elevator joining the tunnel. The domed ceiling and walls are lined with polished marble from Ruhpolding. An engine room and another tunnel, which housed the heating, ventilation pipes, and electric cables, were built running parallel to this tunnel, about 40 meters away from the main entrance. In case of a power cut, a backup diesel submarine engine was delivered from a shipyard in Bremerhaven to provide power for the lift and the house itself. Numerous air vents were installed at the base of the tunnel to provide warm air and to prevent condensation buildup. The work continued throughout the winter of 1937-1938 on all the tunnels along the Kehlstein Road, on the supporting walls, and on the entrance tunnel underneath the house. workers were continually under threat of avalanches from the Göhl and Kehlstein mountains. Work had also commenced on the parking lot at the entrance tunnel. The large square stone used for the supporting wall was dug out from a small quarry near the Sappenkreuz bend, only a few meters below the parking lot. Work commenced on the Kehlsteinhaus itself in mid-February 1938. On the peak of the Kehlstein at 1,834 meters height, they erected the first areas of where the house would stand. Not long after everyone got underway, and once again, everything was in full force, also due to the fact that so many people were assigned to this particular construction site. They built barracks, laid rail tracks, built pulley systems, and even brought up cement mixers. But one false move could have had fatal consequences or end in a deadly accident. Working day and night, the building of the house and the road were accomplished in an unbelievably short time. If you compare today's construction technology to the lack of it then, you will realize the achievement of each and every one of the engineers that helped construct the Kehlstein. They were all pioneers. While the exterior walls of the house are predominantly made of concrete, the interior walls are made of brick. When the exterior walls were in place, the transportation of the granite blocks for the facade began. They had been commissioned in 1937 to a company in Passau from the architect's plans. The masonry division of the Philip Holtzman Company were responsible for the fine workmanship on these blocks. The elevator leading up to the house was completed while work continued on the house. The lift's interior walls were lined with brass, and it could transport up to 12 people. Meanwhile, the Kehlstein Road was almost completed. Here we can see a stonemason putting some final touches to one of the tunnels. The rocks are reduced to gravel to be used as a foundation base for the road. These gravel foundations enabled the road to accommodate heavy trucks. Paving of the road itself was an adventure in itself. Again, caution and concentration were greatly needed for the maneuvering of the huge roller. Tar cooling on its journey up was another big problem. They had to find another way to heat it upon arrival. They then laid the tar over the concrete road, which was then covered with fine gravel. After 12 months of hard work, interrupted by the winter, it was now August of 1938. The road was completed, an amazing feat of engineering which must also pay tribute to the 10 men who lost their lives during its construction. 6 of them died during the road construction itself, 3 died during the tunnel construction, and 1 was stabbed to death at his accommodation due to a bet he lost. The whole project cost around 30 million Reichsmark. On final inspection, the chief engineers confirmed that the construction met with original plans. The Kehlsteinhaus was now completely finished. The massive concrete building has a sun terrace on its west side, which is today used in addition to the rear sun terrace for visitors. The center of the house is octagonal in shape and was built with massive square sand stones. You used to be able to see Hermann Göring's house from the large windows here. At the bottom of the small round hill, there used to be a greenhouse, and Bormann's house was also visible. From a relatively simple hallway where the lift is situated, you can walk through into the dining area. This could seat around 28 people. With its beautiful oak paneling, this is by far the most comfortable room in the house. It was only used twice. Adolf Hitler's personal study, which was lavishly decorated, is immediately next to this room. The kitchen was situated next to Hitler's study. The kitchen equipment was supplied by the Kraft Company, and it was considered state-of-the-art for its time. The lounge for the security staff was situated opposite the kitchen on the other side of the hallway, beside the toilets. Also just off from the hall, you will find the room now referred to as the Eva Braun room, set lower down. Yet again, expensively decorated, it is covered with a wood that can only be found in this particular Bavarian region. The view from this room is a spectacular one over the mountain range. This room, along with the Great Hall, had priceless tapestries plus other expensive decoration, which then cost 56,000 Reichsmark. Today, that is roughly 250,000 euros. The magnificent fireplace was a gift from Mussolini to Hitler upon his 50th birthday. Unfortunately, over the years, souvenir hunters have broken pieces of marble off to take home. On September the 16th, 6 months before the official presentation from Bormann on behalf of the Nazi Party, Hitler made his first visit here. The following piece of film is from an original taken by Hitler's chief adjutant, Wilhelm Brückner, especially for this occasion. Hitler and Eva Braun sit on the right, on the sofa there. Dr. Fritz Todt was also a guest and received personal congratulations from Hitler. Hitler was extremely impressed with the workmanship, but had problems with the altitude. Hence the fact he only made 14 official visits to the Kehlstein. How often he was there unofficially is still not known, even today. Most believe he used the drive up to help impress his diplomatic guests. For example, here is Hitler with the French ambassador André-François Poncet. Mussolini's son-in-law, Foreign Minister Count Ciano, also enjoyed the spectacular views from the Sun Terrace. Dr. Robert Ley, the leader of the German Arbeitsfront, can be seen on Hitler's left, along with his wife and Gauleiter Wagner. Julius Schaub, Hitler's personal adjutant, can be seen on the right. We can just about recognize Martin Bormann at the side of the house. There were permanent guards posted on the Kehlstein in both summer and winter. No easy task considering the area they had to cover, ensuring that sabotage would be impossible. A fence surrounded the Kehlstein area, again closely guarded by SS soldiers. Hitler's longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun, used the house quite often, bringing her sister Gretel along and other friends, spending time together in her private room and also on the Sun Terrace. This is Eva's longtime friend, Herta Schneider, with her husband, Colonel Erwin Schneider. One would only take a trip to Kehlstein when the weather was good. Eva Braun enjoyed the privilege of freedom around the whole Obersalzberg area, being Hitler's secret life companion. She and her friends would often take a trip to the Kehlstein at short notice when the weather was favorable. Here are Eva's parents, Franziska and Fritz Braun. Eva Braun met Hitler in 1930 while he was visiting his personal photographer Heinrich Hoffmann at his studio in Munich. Hoffmann is to be seen on the left of this picture. The film The Running Mountain was shot in 1940 in the Berchtesgaden Alps. The Braun sisters visited the set at Hintersee and invited the crew to come and visit them at the Kehlsteinhaus. On the right side of this picture is Hansi Knotek, and beside her, Paul Richter. Peter Ostermeier, the producer, was also a guest at the Kehlstein. Frau Bormann often visited the Eagle's Nest with her children. The Kehlstein was a world of its own, even in June 3, 1944, when fighting on all fronts were their toughest. The reason for this was Gretel Braun's and SS General Hermann Fegelein's wedding party. Heinrich Himmler and Martin Bormann were the official witnesses. Following the wedding ceremony at Mirabell Palace in Salzburg, the newly married couple drove to Hitler's Berghof to be personally congratulated by him. Part of the wedding festivities took place here. Bormann then suggested that the guests should drive up to the Kehlstein and continue the party there. Hitler did not join them at the Kehlsteinhaus, but decided to remain at the Berghof. The kitchen at the Kehlsteinhaus was not used on this occasion. The kitchen staff from the Platterhof were called upon to transport warm food up to the Kehlsteinhaus. The air raids in 1943 were getting worse, with the Allies growing in strength and gaining ground. And due to this, an anti-aircraft gun was installed at the Kehlstein. In 1944, a plan had already been made by the Allies, a plan to be carried out by air attack, to destroy the Obersalzberg. In the assumption that Hitler's War Command Center was inside the mountain, the Kehlstein, along with the Berghof, were declared the main and most important targets. On April the 25th, 1945, at 9:35 a.m., 318 Lancaster bombers from the RAF took part in a 3-hour air raid on the Obersalzberg. The first attack wave was relatively harmless. The second was not. On the right of the picture is the site of the Berghof house, and in the background, Bormann's house. The SS barracks Obersalzberg were badly damaged during the bombing, as was the Platterhof, which had in fact been renovated in 1941 to a luxurious hotel by Bormann. In the last few years of the war, it had been used as a hospital for wounded soldiers. During the air attacks, there were no prominent Nazi officials on the Obersalzberg except for Hermann Göring, who was being held by SS guards in his bunker. The so-called Alpine fortress had been abandoned. Looters then came and took whatever had not been destroyed. Nothing remained. Berchtesgaden and the Obersalzberg surrendered quietly to the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army on May 5, 1945. The original orders were to take the Obersalzberg and arrest any prominent Nazis. Making their way up the steep mountain road, U.S. troops had no idea as to what would lay in wait for them as they reached the top. After taking the Obersalzberg, they continued by forming a colony of cars that proceeded to take them up to the Kehlstein. This original film clip was taken by an American soldier and documents the occupation of the Alpine fortress. Upon arrival, the Americans discovered the entrance to the elevator tunnel was blocked by snow. German prisoners of war were made to clear the way. At that time, the elevator could not be used, as the entrance to the underground engine room was also hidden beneath the snow. Had it been discovered, it most probably would have been destroyed. Fortunately, it still remains in its original working condition. Meanwhile, the American soldiers realized they could not possibly meet with any further resistance. The Kehlsteinhaus had also been deserted. The very first visitor to the Kehlstein was General Maxwell Taylor, who commanded the 101st Airborne Division. The U.S. delegation meets in the Grand Hall. With appreciation in not meeting any resistance during the occupation of the Eagle's Nest, they can be observed here, relaxing. Due to its impregnable location, the house had not been looted up to now. However, things were soon to change. The entire contents of the building were taken by the American soldiers. The Kehlstein, renamed Eagle's Nest by the Americans, was now a popular attraction for generals and political leaders of the Allies. The Supreme Allied General, Dwight D. Eisenhower, visited the Eagle's Nest in the autumn of 1945. The house was not open to the public in the years immediately following the war. The Kehlsteinhaus was handed back to the German state in 1951. From that time on, a bus service came into operation on the Kehlstein Road. In 1952, the Kehlstein was handed back to the Bavarian government, who then rented the house to the Alpine Association. It was opened to the public then. After a few successful years as a tourist attraction, in 1960, the German government founded the Berchtesgaden County Foundation, a committee who allocated the profits from the Kehlstein to Bavarian charities and non-profit organizations. 50 years after the occupation, the Americans are long gone from Kehlstein, yet the fascination goes on, not only for the historical buildings, but also the breathtaking views they offer to the millions who have already shared the experience. Through all this time, the house has survived the extremities of the weather conditions with German forethought in using massive granite blocks to build with. Bormann commissioned many buildings in the Obersalzberg area. However, apart from the Gutshof and the Kehlsteinhaus, no others remain today. Dealing with this controversial past is difficult. Some of the Third Reich buildings are of architectural value and should be accepted as a part of our history and as a constant reminder for generations to come.